What Jack the Ripper was to the English in the late 1880s in London, that mysterious serial killer who spread terror in the late 1960s in the San Francisco area, is to Americans. To this day, the Zodiac puzzle ignites the minds of historians, journalists, writers, filmmakers, police investigators, and even YouTubers. In this video, we'll try to shed some light on this dark history, so don't touch that dial. Many men were suspected of being the Zodiac. One of them was Richard Gaikowski. Gaikowski, editor of the Good Times newspaper, a local publication in San Francisco, matched the police sketch of the Zodiac made after Stein's murder. Furthermore, Nancy Slover, a dispatcher for the Vallejo police whom the Zodiac contacted shortly after the attack at Blue Rock Springs, identified a recording of Gaikowski's voice as identical to the Zodiac's. As early as January 1969, the Good Times newspaper was running violent works of fiction that were nearly a blueprint for Zodiac's future crimes. During the murder of Paul Stine, the Good Times headquarters was located nearby. In articles he published in 1969, Gaikowski had the habit of shortening his last name to 4 letters and using multiple spellings, such as Gaik or Gaik. Interestingly, Gaik can clearly be seen in Zodiac's 3-part cipher mailed on July 31, 1969. What's more, how Zodiac chose to code the cipher phonetically gives you Gaikowski's full last name. This man, born in picturesque Honolulu, Hawaii, a former teacher, mechanic, and cashier, is one of the main suspects of being the Zodiac serial killer. Arthur Leigh Allen, for that is who we are talking about, although born in Honolulu, grew up in Vallejo, California. He graduated from high school, later studied at the California Polytechnic State University, but dropped out and enlisted in the Navy in 1957, only to be dishonorably discharged a year later. Allen returned to his studies at the Polytechnic, which he completed in 1960, before becoming a teacher at an elementary school in Fairfield, California, but was fired for possessing a firearm on school grounds. In 1966, he was employed at a school in Valley Springs. Allen was dismissed from his teaching job in 1968, following allegations of alleged student molestation. In 1974, he was arrested for the same crime. He pleaded guilty and served a 2-year sentence in the Atascadero State Hospital until 1977. In December 1967 or 1968, Allen's mother reportedly gave him a Zodiac brand watch as a Christmas gift. Not only did the name match the Zodiac signature, but the logo with a circle and cross inside also did. This only fueled speculation about his potential connection to the crime spree. Allen lived in Vallejo and worked just minutes away from the residence of one of the Zodiac victims, Darlene Ferrin, and the site of one of the murders. Shortly after the murder of Darlene Ferrin, a relative of the victim informed investigators that Darlene had a relationship with a man named Lee, which sounded almost identical to Lee. Following the attack at Lake Berryessa on September 27, 1969, Allen was questioned by Detective John Lynch of the Vallejo Police Department. He explained that he had been diving at Salt Point that day. According to statements from family and friends provided to the police before the publication of the Zodiac codes, Allen possessed codes containing identical symbols. Furthermore, Allen was known for using the same unusual spellings and phrases later used by the Zodiac, such as spelling Mary's Mass instead of Merry Christmas and saying trigger mech instead of trigger mechanism. Allen deliberately misspelled words to make them amusing. In a 1969 Zodiac letter, the term busy work was used, a phrase commonly used by elementary school teachers. Busy work is a technique used to keep children occupied and thereby happy by assigning them simple tasks. On August 4, 1971, SFPD inspectors Tashi and Armstrong, along with Sergeant Mullamax from Vallejo PD, interviewed Allen at his workplace in Pinole, California. The Zodiac's last confirmed letter had been sent just a few months earlier. 2.5 years would pass before he would write again. In 1991, Mike Mageau identified Arthur Leigh Allen as the shooter. This identification came after Mageau was shown a set of photos by George Bewart of the Vallejo Police Department. When Bewart asked Mageau why he had never identified Allen in the 20 years when Allen was the prime suspect, Mageau said he was never shown any suspect photos and was only asked if he recognized certain names. Donald Fouke, who supposedly saw the Zodiac fleeing after the Stein murder, said Allen was 100 pounds heavier than the suspect who escaped. Also, Nancy Slover noted that Allen's voice did not match the Zodiac's voice from the Mageau/Ferrin crime scene phone call.
A lot of my tapes, they took samples of my handwriting. They screwed up a lot of my stuff here too, but that wasn't, they didn't take that. They took a couple of typewriters. I know who the guy was. I'd never said a word to him. I didn't like the punk. And I said, well, this guy must be on the hot seat for something. Oh, no, he just phoned down and volunteered this information. Well, I found out the next day from a different police officer that, yeah, he sure had. He was trying to plea bargain because he was facing 30-year rap on multiple armed robberies. I couldn't murder anyone. It's difficult as hell, and it can be it can be terribly depressing. And if I deserved any of it, that would be something different, but I don't. There are two types of liars in the world, fishermen and policemen, and not necessarily in that order. And their function is lying to you is to trip you up. They can't do it to me because I have nothing to trip over. I'm not the Zodiac killer. I know that. I know that deep in my soul. I've never been known for good luck, and I guess this is pretty much living proof of it. I couldn't murder anyone.
Vallejo police issued a search warrant for Allen's home in February 1991. 2 days after Allen's death in 1992, Vallejo police issued another warrant and confiscated property from his residence. More incriminating evidence included a letter sent to the Riverside Police Department from the Bates killer, written in elite font on a Royal typewriter, the same brand found during the 1991 search of Allen's residence. Allen appears as one of the main suspects in the 2007 film Zodiac, directed by David Fincher. The film is based on the book of the same title by Graysmith. Jake Gyllenhaal stars as Graysmith, with other actors such as Mark Ruffalo, Robert Downey Jr., and John Carroll Lynch, who, due to his striking resemblance to Allen, plays the role of the suspect. In 2002, the SFPD developed a partial DNA profile from saliva found on Zodiac stamps and envelopes. This DNA was compared to Allen's DNA. The tests did not match. On August 26, 1992, Vallejo police and fire were called to a person needing assistance on Fresno Street 32. When they arrived, the ambulance and fire department found Arthur Leigh Allen dead on the floor of his basement. According to Allen's autopsy, he died from diabetic kidney failure. Another suspect was Ross Sullivan. Ross Sullivan was linked to the Sherry Joe Bates crime in Riverside. He was a library assistant at Riverside City College, and suspicion fell on him after he disappeared for several days shortly after the murder. Additionally, he usually wore the same outfit, and when he returned after the mysterious disappearance, his attire had completely changed. Sullivan matched the description of the Zodiac, with short hair and glasses. He wore military-style boots with a sole pattern that matched the one found at the Berryessa Lake crime scene. Reportedly, he lived in Presidio Heights at the YMCA Center during the murder of Paul Stein. Sullivan was described by co-workers as an unpredictable eccentric with a tendency towards aggression. He was also hospitalized multiple times for bipolar disorder and schizophrenia. He wrote an essay on handwriting analysis and a master's thesis on cryptography methodology. The confession letter and the handwriting of Ross were identical, also very similar to Zodiac's. He died in 1977, and the Zodiac activity ceased. Lawrence Kane was also suspected of being the Zodiac. This New York-born man had a rich police record from the 1940s. Due to extensive brain damage from a car accident in 1962, psychologists allegedly diagnosed Kane in 1965 as losing the ability to control impulses. He had previously been arrested for voyeurism. Pam Huckabee, the sister of Zodiac victim Darlene Ferrin, claims that Kane had been stalking Darlene for several months before her murder. Additionally, a potential Zodiac victim, Kathleen Johns, identified Kane as her abductor. Patrol officer Don Falk, who likely observed the Zodiac at the scene of Stein's shooting, said that Kane bore a strong resemblance to the man he and Eric Zelms saw leaving the scene. Kane also worked at the same hotel in Nevada as potential Zodiac victim Donna Lass. Fakel Zaraoui, a French-Moroccan business consultant, claimed in 2021 that he solved the Z13 cipher, and the solution to the puzzle reads, "My name is Care," which he said is a likely typo for K. Others disputed that Zaraoui could have solved the cipher. Kane died on May 20, 2010. The list of suspects in being the Zodiac does not end with the names mentioned above. Over the course of more than 50 years, many new names have been involved in this case, including Earl Van Best Jr., whom his son suspected of being the Zodiac, but DNA evidence did not yield concrete results. Louis Joseph Myers, who confessed to a friend in 2001 that he was the Zodiac, sounding almost like the main character in Stephen King's The Shining. Jack Terrence. Richard Marshall, pointed to by police informants, but his fingerprints did not match those collected at the crime scenes. Gary Francis Post, whose forehead scars were said to resemble the alleged scars on the Zodiac's forehead, and Joseph Bevilacqua, who allegedly confessed to a journalist that he was behind the Zodiac and Monster of Florence murders, but later retracted his statement. It is highly likely that among the suspects mentioned was the Zodiac, as each of them lived near the crime scenes and had some contact with at least one of the victims. However, if he was not among any of the suspected individuals over the years, it would mean that he lived somewhere peacefully, undisturbed by law enforcement, reading about himself in newspaper articles, literary publications, or watching movies. It seems that we may never know the true identity of the perpetrator, and this mystery will continue to ignite the human imagination.